Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be building a new project with the intention of using React Router DOM. We're going to be building this navigation menu here where you can click to go to home and you would be on the landing page. You can click chop and you would land on the chop page, and you could click blog and go to the blog page. For your convenience, all of this code will be hosted in CodeSandbox, and I will be leaving a link in the description below so you can check out the code, change it, and use it if you need it. I went ahead and created a few folders and files for this project so that I don't waste your time. But all of these folders, like here, source, components, and then header, they all have empty files. Like this header.js is an empty file, header.styles.js is an empty file, and all of them are like that. We will go over the implementation of each one of them. Okay, so we have a clean React application with a few folders, a few empty files, and where would we start implementing this website? There are many ways to go about it, but in this case, I'm gonna go from the smallest component, and then I will go to higher components or components that contain those smaller components. So the first thing that we want to do is create this navigation menu. And the reason I created those folders and files with names is because I already kind of thought about what the names would be for those. So we are going to be looking at having these items here, blog, shop, and home, be a nav item. That's going to be the component. We wanted to think in components, so nav item, and then that navigation item is going to live in a navigation bar. We could call that navigation menu. I'm going to use navbar. We also have a title here, but since title is just too overloaded, we will use header title for that component. And then finally, all of the components that I just mentioned live inside of the header. So we will have a header component and all of the small components will live there. So let's get started with that. Here in CodeSandbox, the default React application renders this view. Hello CodeSandbox, start editing to see some magic happen. And that is all in app.js and index.js. So we have index here that imports app and renders app. And if I go to app.js, we have that text, hello CodeSandbox, and the h2 there. So since we said that we're going to start with the smallest component first, that was the nav item, I'm going to go to the folder nav item. I'm going to open that file, nav item.js, and we'll start coding right here. The first things that we will be doing here are mostly boilerplate. So I'm going to have to import React from React. We will start creating the component with const nav item, which is a arrow function. And for now, we will just say that it returns a list item that says I am nav item, and let's close it. Finally, we will go all the way down and export default that nav item component. So nothing fancy at the moment. One thing that I want to note is that I am using the default prettify function of CodeSandbox that comes by default. But for instance, if I remove the semicolons here, and then I just save the file, Command S, the semicolons will come back. So if you see the page jumping or something, it's the prettifier making its job. Now that we have a basic component with a nav item, let's go to app.js and we will import that component, importing nav item from components, nav item, nav item. I will delete all this. I will delete all the content that we have here, and I will put nav item. Self-closing tag is fine. And then let's go see how that looks. And we see that we removed all the contents that were by default, and now we have I am nav item, and we have one of those. So now for this nav item, we know that we need 3 of them, right? We need the home, we need shop, we need blog, and they are all gonna be the same. So we want to use the same component for all of them, but the title or the label of the item is gonna change. So what we want is do that. We want to pass a property called label that is gonna be different for all of them. And we actually don't need the curly braces. Let's just do a string, and we will have one that says home. We will duplicate that, and we will have another one called shop, duplicate again, and have another one called blog. Now, if we go to the page, we see that they all say I am nav item. Why? Well, because we have not implemented that label property in the component, so we have to go back and do that. We're gonna go to the nav item component, and we could accept props like this and then just grab props dot label, but we can also destructure props and receive label from there. Once it's destructured, we're gonna remove the content of the text, and we will use curly braces to say to the component that we're gonna use JavaScript, and we will add the label. Now if we go back to our page, we can see that we have the same component, but it's rendering different labels, home, shop, and blog. What I wanna do next is just take care a little bit of the styles and remove these bullets here, and also these items should be next to each other and not on top of each other. So they should be inline. For that, we're gonna go to navitem.styles.js, and this is gonna be maybe interesting for you if you haven't seen this before. So usually you would imagine that you would have a .css file, and that's great. But here we're gonna use styles with JavaScript. And what is gonna be even more interesting is that we're gonna use it as a hook. So for that, before I start writing any code, I'm gonna have to go to add dependencies, and we are gonna add from material UI, we're gonna say material UI / styles. We're gonna install that dependency, and now we can see that dependency here in the dependencies pane. So the way this works, and you don't have to do it this way, you can do it with CSS, but the way this thing works is I'm gonna import make styles from at material UI, and the editor here is giving us the option, so let's just select that, and there we go. Now we're gonna export default make styles, which is a function, and we're gonna pass an object. So this might seem a bit complicated, but bear with me, it's gonna be very easy once we finalize this. So here in this object, we're gonna have to add a key that is gonna be one of the styles. I usually use the name of the component and that root, and that's gonna be the root like div or container of the component. So I'm gonna say nav item root. And for now, let's just add a color, and let's say green. Now that we have a style in place, let's go to the nav item so that we can import those styles. I'm gonna say import useStyles from nav item styles. Now, why am I importing useStyles? Well, because this function make styles returns the hook useStyles. So you can see that it says useStyles, and that's because it is a hook. So make styles returns a hook, and since I'm saying export default, I can just import it like that without curly braces or anything. So we are importing a hook, and then I can go to the component. I'm gonna create a constant called classes. That is a property that will be returned by useStyles. I'm running the hook. Then I go to my list item. I will add class names. That's the way we add class names in React. And I will say equals to classes dot nav item root. And let's go check it out. So awesome. Now we have all of our items green because of the useStyle hook. And that is how we are going to be using styles in our JavaScript files. So let's go back to the styles to take care of some of that. And I'm gonna open the preview pane here so that we don't have to go back and forward for a moment and we can see the styles changing. We don't need that much space for this. So first thing that I'm gonna do is remove that green style, and the color, I'm gonna get it from my design. This is not something that you need to do or know, but I'm gonna go to that field that I am using. I copy paste the hex value and I'm just gonna put it there. And now I have the color that I want. The thing that bothers me the most at this moment is that list style with the bullet. So I'm gonna remove that with list style type. And I will say none. And that already looks better. And now let me just take care of some other styles like the font weight. I want this to be a little bolder, I would say. So I'm gonna say 500 for that. Font size, we'll say 16 pixels. And by using this prettify formatter, you can see that the quotes go to double quotes. I would usually use single quotes, but this is how this project is by default. We would have to use a configuration file to change that, so I'm not gonna do that. Just wanted to let you know. Also, as part of my styles, I decided for this project that I want my font family to be Noto Sans. And another style that I want here as a default, if you notice, if I hover over home, chopper blog, we get this like text icon, and we don't want that, we want a pointer. So we are gonna go back to the styles and say cursor pointer. So now if I hover over the items, I have this hand, but it's a pointer. And that is great because that tells the user that he can click these items. So now what about the items being next to each other? We are gonna change that style, but not from here. We're gonna give that responsibility to the nav bar. So the component that is gonna hold all of these guys. So now we have to do some other things before we get to that. I am gonna go back to app, and we can see we have these 3 nav items, but instead of that, what we want to have, and I'm gonna have to comment that because if not, this CodeSandbox might do funky stuff. We would want here to say nav bar, and that would hold the 3 nav items. So I'm just gonna comment that. That's what we want. So good thing we already have that file. I'm gonna go to the folder in components, navbar.js. And again, so that we're not wasting time, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go to the nav item. I'm gonna copy everything here and I'm gonna paste it in navbar. So we have our boilerplate with our React import and all that. These styles are importing the wrong file, so let's change that. That file, of course, the navbar styles don't have anything, but it's not important. Navbar styles, we can comment that so we don't have any trouble for now. Actually, we can't because this is gonna give us problems. Okay, let's see if that works. I'm not gonna comment that, but I do want to change the name of this component here and here. We will change the other property later. I'm gonna call navbar. You can see I'm changing the constant and the export. Now I'm gonna change the style here that we are importing from classes, nav item root, but this one is gonna be navbar root. And since this style doesn't exist in that file, we would have to copy it, but that file is still empty. So let's do the same thing. I'm gonna go to nav item styles, the one that we just did. I'm gonna copy all of that, and I'm gonna go to my navbar styles. And I hope I am not making you dizzy with all this. I am gonna paste it here, and now this nav item root should be changed to navbar root. And I am just gonna remove all the styles for now. And at the moment, this shouldn't change anything because we are not even using that component. I'm just gonna save these files. If we go back to app.js and I remove the comment for this component, it will crash because first I need to import the component. So import navbar from components, navbar. And we can see that this navbar component is rendering a bullet here. Why? Well, let's go see that. So our navbar, it's a copy of our other file. Now I'm gonna close the preview window. So it's a copy of the list of the nav item, and in nav item we're sending a label, but with navbar we're not sending anything, and this is not what we want in navbar anyways. So let's remove the label. Let's for now say just I don't know, something like hello from navbar. I'm going to remove also this structuring and the label. And with the nav item, we are rendering list items. And since the nav bar is going to be the parent of those, we want this to not be a list item, but an unordered list that will contain list items. And I'm going to save that. Now let's go to our application, and perfect. We're rendering hello from navbar that is not containing the list items. And that is our next step. Now we want to be able to render just navbar, and navbar should have all of that inside. So let me close all of these files before we get all confused. I'm just gonna leave open app.js. And what we want again is to have all of this nav items be inside of navbar. So I am gonna just cut them. So Command X, so that removes them, but I also have them in my clipboard. I will open navbar again, navbar. I will paste all of those components inside of the unordered list. I saved it so that the format goes right into the place where it should be. I'll delete that extra string. And now we have to just import that component, the nav item component. So I'm gonna do import nav item from, and in this case we're inside of components, so I just want to go out one and go to the navbar item. If you are following along, this might be, you know, one of those places where why am I not importing the right thing? And it's because before we were saying from where we are we want components / nav item, but now we are inside of another component. We are inside of navbar, so we have to go out one file and then into nav item and inside of nav item. So out and then nav item, just in case. How does this look? Well, we are rendering the same 3 items, but now with just one component, the navbar component. So now it's time to go to the styles file for the navbar to make sure that the items sit next to each other and not on top of each other. And in this make styles function, that is our JS in CSS, we can do things like CSS. The point of this is to be helpful and not to be more complicated. So we can say things like in Sass or less that we use an ampersand to say that we want the root styles plus something else. In this case is, you know, whatever we have and a child of that HTML tag. Let's say that this, well, let's not say this is a unordered list. When we say navbar root, that's a UL. And so we're saying that UL, and then we pass it one space because we are saying that it's a child. If we didn't pass the space, then it would be in the same UL, but this is a child of, and the child is a list item. So we're targeting the list item inside of the UL, and I will open a new object there. And the only thing that I want right now is this list items, because it's all of them, to display inline. Let's go to our page, and we can see now we have home, shop, and blog next to each other because they are inline. So now we have a little bit of spacing issues. They are all squished together, and we don't want that. We want a little bit of padding between them. So let's just take care of that really quick. And that would be part of the nav items themselves. This kind of things can be very controversial, and someone might say, no, this should be part of the navbar. Someone else just might say it should be part of the nav item. So if you have an opinion on that, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Anyways, like I said, this project is going to be in CodeSandbox, so you can go there and change it and do whatever you want with it, experiment. So I'm just going to go to the nav item styles, and I will add that padding. And so we don't want padding on the top and bottom. So we're gonna be using the shorthand of this. So not top and bottom, 0 for that. And for left and right, we do want padding, and we want 12 pixels. And if we go back to our application, there we have it. Now we have padding between the items. From our design, we had state for the items. So they were not all gray like they are right now. If you selected home, that would be black, and actually it has a underline. So we also want to do that. For now, let's first take care of the state. And for the state, we would have to go to the nav item. But first, I'm just gonna close all of this. I'm gonna save this file. I'm gonna delete this unnecessary import. I will open the nav item. Or no, actually, I'm gonna open the nav bar component so that we can look at what we want before we implement something. So it's very important to think of what we want first, because if not, we can end up implementing things that we don't really need or want, or that's not the way we want the component API per se to work. Let's first think of what we want. And right now what we want is to be able to pass state to the components. So I want to be able to say nav item, I want the label to be home, and I want to be able to say if this particular item is selected or not. So I'm gonna pass a property called isSelected. And I am gonna do the exact same thing for the other ones. Actually, I'm gonna just do option command down, so I can add text in multiple places, and I'll say isSelected equals. And if the nav bar is gonna be the component responsible to keep track of the state of the nav items, then we're gonna have to use our first React hook that is not from the styles or something. So this is a React hook called useState. And I'm gonna say const selected item. So that's the getter. That's when I want to know what the selected item is. And then the next one is the setter. So when I want to set the different state, and this one is gonna be called set selected item. And all of that will be returned by our useState hook. The editor here is giving us the opportunity to auto import this. So I'm just gonna select useState, and that imported the hook from React right here. So I'm gonna run that function, and we want to have a default state. So the first time that this nav bar component renders, what state do we wanna have? And I'll just say index 0. So the first item in the list is the one that's going to be selected. So in this case, it's going to be home. And we might want to come back for some cleanup later, but for now, let's just do it like that. And the logic for that is going to be isSelected if the selected item it's equal to 0 for this first item. And this is the part that I'm saying that maybe we want to come for some cleanup later, because this is definitely not the way we want to have reusable components and things like that. So I'm gonna grab all that logic, I'm gonna copy it, and I'm gonna do the same options command, and I'm gonna paste this for both. And I'm just gonna change this one to be 1 and this one to be 2. And now these components have the ability to know if they are selected or not. We haven't implemented the isSelected property in nav item, but we will get there. And the other thing that we want is also, we want to be able to click them. We have home selected by default, home right here, because it's index 0, but we want to be able to click chop, and then chop should be selected. So for that, we need to add a click handler. I'm gonna go here at the end of the component. I'm gonna say options command again, down, down. Let's give a space, and I'm gonna say on click. And I'm gonna get inside of there. I'm gonna say that when the item is clicked, I wanna run a function, an arrow function, that is gonna run set selected item. And again, it will select the item. And I'm sorry that this is not in the screen. It's gonna select the same thing that we had here. So 0, 1, and 2. And now finally that I saved, this jumped, and let's put it on the screen. And there we have it. And there we have it. Now we have all the properties one on top of each other. Now we can click on the item and select that item, and we can keep track of the state of that item to know if it's selected or it's not selected. So this is what we want. We want label is selected and on click. Now we have to go to the nav item itself to make the implementation of all those properties that we added. So we have label. Also we have an on click handler, and we have is selected. The first thing that I'm gonna implement is the isSelected property, because it's the one that is gonna tell us if something is happening. If we implement onClick, then we might be clicking. We are not gonna know if something is changing or not unless we use a console log, and I don't want to do that. Let's say that isSelected is gonna add a style to our component. We know that we have classes and nav item root, but if this item is selected, we want to have that class and also the selected class. So I could do that in line here. I could change this to be a templating string and then make this JavaScript. And yes, that's what we want, but we don't want to have this in line because it just gets kind of dirty. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a constant here called root classes. I am gonna copy that string that we created and I'm gonna paste it in root classes. And now I can grab root classes and paste it in our class names. So everything is the same right now and nothing has changed. If we go to our application, everything is there. But now that we add the isSelected style, it's gonna be cleaner. Let's go one line above and I'm gonna add another constant called selected class. And again, this is just for the sakes of being clean, because we could just add the code that I'm gonna add here, like in line here, and have a long line. That's just good practice to kind of avoid that and give names to the properties. So I'm gonna say that from the isSelected property, so if it is selected, I want to add a string to the classes that's gonna say selected. If it's not selected, I just want an empty string. That's what's gonna happen. And I am adding a space here so that that space gets appended to this string. So now let's use that. I am gonna add another $sign and curly braces. I'm gonna copy the selected class, pass it here. And now if this component is selected, it now has a selected class. Let's take a look at that real quick. I will open the console here, inspect. And I hope that you can see here that we have the UL on order list and then the list items. And this first one, which is home, has the selected string there. The other ones don't have that. Now the thing right now is that it's home selected by default, but if I click the other ones, nothing will happen. I can show that window again. And you can see that home is still selected because we have not implemented the onClick handler. So let's do that. And this one is simpler. We are just gonna go to the list item, make some space here and say onClick, which is the event from the element. And onClick, we want to run the onClick property. So it's basically a callback function. And I will save this. So now it looks like that. We still have home selected, but if I go to the web page and I click chop, let's see what happened. And we can see that now our chop is selected. Nothing is changing in the styles because we didn't say what should happen when any item is selected. So let's take care of that too. I will go to nav item styles, and this time I'm gonna open with Command P, nav item styles. And we have all these styles from nav item root, which are right now the base styles. But I can say again with the CSS-like selector that I want all of those styles in this nav item, but also, and I'll have to add a comma here, but also I'll add the ampersand if that nav item has also the has also the class selected. Then we want something else to happen. And that else is the color should change. And I already know that the hex for the color that I want is hash 3D, 3D, 3D. Let's take a look. And if I click chop, blog, well, nothing happened. Let's see what is a typo. So selected, we wanted to say selected. Let's go back. And we can see now that home has the default style. So this one is like black. And then if I click chop, now that one is black. And now we have the functionality that we want. Now another thing that we have missing is the underline for the state. When the item is selected, it should be underlined. I'm gonna skip that for now. I'm gonna go straight to React Router and the hooks so that we can start seeing things moving around. Let's go back to the application. And again, I'm gonna close all the files except app.js. Now that we are here in our app component, we can think about how we're gonna implement our routes. There's one thing missing. We are using this nav bar. And from the beginning, we said that we were gonna have, like, the highest component was gonna be the header component. But I'm gonna jump that for now. That's something that I'll come back to. It's not a problem. But here we are in the app component, and this nav bar is gonna be present all the time. And every time we click an item, something else is going to appear there. And to do that, what we're gonna do is add a new line here, and we're gonna say that the app component is gonna accept children, and children is gonna come from the properties of the component. So again, it could be props, but we are gonna destructure it. So we're gonna say children from props. So we're saying that we have this app component that will have a nav bar, and then we are gonna dynamically be presenting one component or another depending on our router. And here is where we are gonna take care of React Router DOM. For that, let's go to index.js. And now we need the React Router DOM dependency. We don't have that one. So let's go to add dependency, search for React Router DOM, and we have it right here. Again, we can see that we added that dependency here in the dependencies pane. We have there React Router DOM. And let's get started with that import. I'm gonna say import, and the name of the component is browser router. And since that name is a bit too long, we are gonna just change that to be browser router as router. We're gonna get this from React Router DOM. We are also gonna need the route component and the switch component. So we said that app was gonna accept some children. So we have to change that now. We are gonna remove the self-closing tag. We're gonna say that app closes like this. And inside of that, we're gonna have the children. And the children is gonna be the routes that we're gonna have. One for home, one for shop, and one for blog. So let's add the first route. We're gonna say route as a self-closing tag. We will pass a path. And this one will be the base route. And we also need to pass a component that is the one that is gonna be rendered when the route is at root. And for now, for simplicity, since it needs a component, we can just pass an arrow function that returns a React fragment. And for now, we will say that it will have a text that says home. We need to do the same for shop and blog. So let's just duplicate this home route, 1, 2, and we will just change the second one to, instead of root, it will be /shop. And then the third one will be /blog. And of course, also the text for them. So instead of home, this one will say shop, and the last one will say blog. So the idea of the route is that whenever the location of your browser says just /, home will appear. When the location is /shop, then shop will appear, and so on. We're going the right path here, but in order for this to work, we actually have to wrap the app component and all the routes with the router. So we have to use the router component, add also the closing router, and then let's just move it down, save. And the last thing that we need is also to wrap all of this inside of the switch component. The closing switch, move it down, save, and now we have it. Let's see if everything is still working on our application. And yes, great. So we are at root right now, and so that's why we're at home. Now the next thing is that I want to click shop and go to shop, and same for blog, click blog and go to blog. But right now it's not going anywhere because we do have a click handler for chop and blog. But the only thing that the click handler does is change the style so that it is selected. But we're not telling the handler that when we click, we also want to change the location of the browser. To take care of that last step, we're gonna go to the nav bar component. And we can see here the onClick handler. On click, we set the selected item to whatever the index is for each item. And now we also need to change the URL or the location of the browser. So to accomplish that, instead of having set selected item on all of this, I'm gonna select the three of them with Command D and then again Command D. And I'm gonna change the handler to be handle click. Now we don't have that handle click yet. Let's go and create that. I'm gonna add a line here. I will say const handle click, which is equals to an arrow function. And first we will just do what we were doing before. So set selected item, and we will have to pass the index of the item. So let's say that we will receive the index of the item, and below where I'm using the onHandleClick, we are already passing that index, so we are set with that. Now for the location piece, what we want is to be able to push locations to the history object. So for that we need to make that import here. We're gonna say that we will import useHistory from React router DOM. We will go to our handle click. Before the function, we're gonna add or use the useHistory hook. I will say const history, and it's a property that comes from useHistory. And now inside of the handle click function, we will say that to that history object, we want to push, and I'm gonna pass a path. So we're not receiving a path yet, but we're gonna pass that right here. So we're receiving index only right now from our handler, and we also want to receive a path. And now let's just add that on our handle click. So we handle click, pass index 0, and also we want to pass the path that in this first item is /home. And let's add that to the other ones. And this one is 1. And the path will be chop. And for the last one, we will receive 2, and the path will be blog. Now let's go check this out. We do have the base route working. We have home because there's no slash. I mean, if there's slash or nothing, it's the same thing. That's the base route. Now I'm gonna go to chop, and it did change, but now it says home chop. And if I go to blog, it says home blog. So it is working, but there's a tiny detail there that it's not working that great. And I have a video where I explained exactly why that happens. So I'm gonna leave the link to that video in the description, and also you can click on the recommended video above. For now, let's go to our code. I will go to index.js, and what we want to do is in this first route, we want to pass another property that is exact. So we are passing this property not like this, like path equals something, because by default, when you pass a property like this, just the name of the property, the component receives it as a Boolean. And we can see that here. It says JSX attribute exact true. Let's save that, and now let's go to the page. And we can see that now it's working because we see that now it says blog. But let's try it. Let's go to chop, and now it says chop, blog, and home. And well, something is not exactly right, because when we click home, I would expect to see home, and I don't see it. So let's go back to the code, and I think I know what it is. So let's go to the nav bar, and yeah, so when we are passing, and this is a mistake that I did, when we're passing the click handler, we're saying that the index is 0 and the URL or location that we are pushing is /home. But that's not true, because I was also saying that in index, the path is /. So the root is slash. When we are at slash, we want to present home, but then never I said home. So I have to remove the word home, and now if we're at slash, we will present home, and that should fix it. Let's check that out. Let me click chop, home, perfect, and blog. So now it is working. If you like the contents of this video, don't forget to click the like button. And if you want to continue building this site with me, consider subscribing to the channel so that you don't miss the next episode. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching and see you next time.